Negotiations don't just happen in the boardroom. They happen in everyday life. I'm Susie Tomenchok, expert negotiator, author, and TEDx speaker. I'm glad you're here. I'm going to show you the art of negotiation without manipulation so you can level up, know your worth, and adopt a negotiator mindset. Let's go. Hi, friends. I'm so happy that you made the choice to be here today because I have a guest that you're going to find phenomenal. She's a friend of mine. She's actually my coach in terms of how I show up on camera. And her name is Tracy Phillips. Welcome, Tracy.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so funny because I've been on the back end of this, but now I get to be on the actual show. So this is exciting for me.
Oh, I'm super excited. And it's so funny because I'm using my hands as I'm talking. And I know that's the thing we're going to talk about is how we communicate beyond the words that we say. Yes. And this is so relevant to negotiation in our everyday professional lives. And so tell the audience a little bit about you, just so they have some context of how you come to this great wisdom.
Yeah. So I have 23 years of pro video experience. I started in documentaries. I even have an Emmy nomination in documentaries.
Nice.
And so I spent so many of those years, behind the camera, helping other people present on camera, but also interviewing and really helping people feel comfortable. And I feel like that is my sweet spot when I do coach executive leaders, corporate leaders, is really being able to help people show up in a way that feels good to them, but also makes an impact. It's memorable and it feels authentic. And I feel like that word is thrown around way too much today, but it is true. Genuine is the word I like to use better, but really showing up in a way that is genuine so that you are perceived. So when we're talking about negotiation and leadership, how do you want to be perceived as a leader? And these are all the types of things: how you talk, walk, show up. All of those things really help your perception and how you're being perceived.
Yeah. And so I want people to really think, we're not talking about when you're in front of a bunch of people and you're presenting or you're recording something. We're talking about in your everyday meetings, one-on-one virtually, in meetings with colleagues, when you're trying to land a new deal with somebody, and negotiation. But it's more, it goes beyond your words. It goes to how you show up. So tell us a little bit give us some of the nuggets that you think that are really valuable for people to really consider.
Well, I think before we started recording, I was talking about a body language researcher named Albert Mehrabian, and he talks about the 7-38-55 rule. And that is 7% of what you said, your spoken word, is memorable, 38% tone, and 55% is your body language. And I see a lot of people, and I help with content as well, but the spoken, what you're speaking, is not nearly as impactful as what your body language or what your voice is actually saying. And we talked also, we'll get into it later, but about like the body language, that you can't lie with your body language. You can work on it, but it doesn't lie.
Yeah. So let's really think about that. 55% of what we're communicating to others has nothing to do with our words. It has everything to do with how we're positioned, how we're using our hands, what we're saying, all of those things, those gestures. So you're going to really go into some more detail about that.
And I mean, again, when we're talking about virtual presentations, all that, which is my world, where you're framed in your virtual presentation. I cannot tell you how many leaders I show up with, and they're supposed to be doing global sales meetings and all of these types of things virtually, and they're here, they're not well lit. It happens every week. Right. And people just don't really think about, how close you are to the camera also speaks volumes about your confidence.
Yeah. And where you're looking.
Oh my gosh.
I have people are like, oh, I just thought that you knew I was looking at you, and they're looking over at the camera. They're like, but you're right there.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, that doesn't mean that.
No. Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah. And it's awkward. So these are the things, I mean, like anything, it takes practice, right? So when we're talking about virtual meetings, or even right now, like I'm looking a little to you, but really I'm trying to connect with my little green dot, because that little green dot is my audience. It's my audience. It's it's you. It's right. And so really finessing those things. I've been in places where people are like, oh my gosh, how do you keep your eye contact the whole time? And I really don't keep it the whole time, but I really make a concerted effort to make sure I'm looking at that green dot pretty often so that the people on the other end feel valued, they feel
That
heard, they
connection.
feel seen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's so important for leaders to really, because that connection builds trust, and
Yes.
trust is the foundation
Everything.
to any deal making as a leader, as a colleague, all of those things. So when we come back, we're going to dig into it. And you have the behind the scenes with Tracy right here. So don't go away, because you will want to hear all she has to give us. We'll be right back. All right, I'm super excited to jump in with Tracy Phillips today. You know, Tracy, I'm actually in 2 days going to do uh, a training on influence and building influence, and it's going to be a room full of engineers and introverts. And so,
Yeah.
one of the senior leaders said, "I want my people to understand not to just show up, but to be seen."
Yes. Oh,
So,
I love
talk to
that,
me
by the
about
way.
that.
It almost gives me the chilly bumples when you say that, because it's important. Yeah. So, and here's one of the myths about showing up on camera with, I mean, we're all in Zoom rooms all day long, or meetings, Google Meet, whatever you're using, WebEx, and it's it's so easy to just leave your camera off and have your name up
Yeah,
there. But what happens is, when you are not showing up in that way, you're not memorable. And we need you to be not just showing up, but to be memorable. And the myth is that in order to be memorable, you have to be this like animated bunny rabbit and always chiming in with your opinions, and that's not true.
yeah,
Yeah. So what I like to work with people on is, when we talk about just showing up, is turning your camera on. I mean, I also do visibility trainings, and the big joke I start with my housekeeping is, by the way, in case you didn't get the memo, this is a visibility training. Turn your darn camera on. And I
yeah,
get lots of laughter, but right, we walk around the room and we help them show up. But when you're showing up physically, right, people can see you, you're more memorable. That alone is more memorable. And so, when we're talking about being in a room of other leaders, or if you are, downline and in with executives, and you're nodding, just nodding, I'm listening, that makes you more memorable. So that next
yeah,
promotion or that next project, they'll say, you know what, Tracy's always on the calls. She always looks engaged.
yeah.
That doesn't mean I have to constantly be, the person talking, but I look interested. So I'm nodding, I'm listening. Little hand signals of like, little claps or snaps or something to say, like, I
Yeah.
support what that person's saying. Really, really important
It's
for
huge.
yeah.
It's huge, and it's also, it supports that person that's talking. Don't assume that this is a senior leader. They have their agenda. They have confidence that they need to build up to.
Yes.
And so, seeing that engagement, I think the equivalent of that virtual putting your camera on
Yeah.
is not going to a meeting with your laptop and just sitting there and not being there. Be in the meeting, even if you don't have an active role. Like you
Yes.
said, use those gestures and be seen in that moment. That is
Yep.
memorable as well.
Yes. Very, very much so. And again, like, it really is. It makes the speaker feel good, because you and I both do. I mean,
Yeah,
I do virtual trainings all the time, and I tell people, hey, I thrive on your live connection.
yeah,
Laugh at my jokes.
yep,
Tell them what you need from them. And so, if you, whether you're the speaker or the participant, you both have roles in this virtual realm that are really, really important.
yeah. And
Including, we talked about ahead of time, like, ask questions. And if you don't have a question, what about raising someone else up on your team? So making a comment on the back of their question, or, that's ways of also showing your own kind of leadership, is just supporting your other team members, and saying, yes, what, Sherry
totally.
said this, and I couldn't agree more with that. Here's why. Right. And
And
so,
that
yeah,
shows so much. Like
yeah,
people notice those things, not just the person that is benefiting from that support that you've given, but
yeah,
it other people notice and it's like that's really great. Even if they don't make a conscious note,
yeah,
they still notice that it's so important. And even when people we talked about connection as an extrovert, I need people. I know introverts will say, I'm just more comfortable not having nonverbals. But listen, I need the verbals. I mean, I need the nonverbals to
yeah.
understand your energy. So it may feel uncomfortable to you. It doesn't feel uncomfortable to me. And
Right.
it's always really interesting to me when people aren't engaged and they're not even looking at me.
Right. Well, I mean, when we talk about the virtual world, I mean, think about, you think you're just slyly looking at your phone. Suddenly your head is down and to the side. I know you're looking at your phone.
Yeah.
I will call on you, by the way, if I see this happening in one of my rooms, just simply because, I mean, that's the whole thing is, again, as a speaker, you want as much engagement and you don't have that live audience where you are the only thing they can look at. They are
Yeah.
suddenly in a room of a lot of distractions. And so, yeah, so I just think, all the little things like eating, looking at your phone, looking off, having a separate conversation. I've, been on things where people are answering their phone and they forget to mute themselves. And I'm like, it's so rude. But also, all of a sudden, they put themselves in this like, oh, that's the rude person on the right. Like, so,
Yeah.
so suddenly you're also demeaning your position by simply just not being a polite participant.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You're also kind of saying, this is not important to me. I
correct.
will take anything else
Yeah,
over this meeting. And that's such
yeah,
a, so it's all about the frame. It's about
yeah,
looking at the camera, making sure that, and even thinking about how are you showing up? What is the frame in the room?
yeah.
How are people seeing you? Are you sitting at the table? Are you sitting in the corner?
So let's
what are the
let's talk about the
dynamics?
framing. I love talking about
Okay.
because you talk about framing in negotiations, which is a
Yep.
little different than this, but this is your physical framing. And so video is a close-up medium. And what I mean by that is the closer to the camera you are, the more memorable you are. So if I
Nice.
am
I like
far
that.
away from my camera and kind of off and down, I seem small. But if I'm
Mm.
close up, it's perceived as confidence. And so these are tiny little things that you can do because a lot of people come to me, I'm not confident on camera. Well, let's just fix your framing. And that
Wow.
alone will help you be perceived as confident. And from there, like I said, it's a process. But when we talk about framing, I'm talking about physically where you are in this little like frame, this virtual frame. And so you do want to fill the space. And what I say is you really don't want more than an internet inch over your head. You can have a little bit more space than that, in the old world of video. When we talk about where you're supposed to be, there was like the rule of thirds that you can be in any thirds. But when we're talking about meetings like this, you want to be in the center, you want to be filling the space. And then when we talked about it a little bit earlier, is your eye line should be directly. So my eye is exactly lined up with my camera. So I'm not looking up at my camera and I'm not looking down at my camera. So these are
Yeah.
also positional, right? Things that can either make you look like you've got an ego or again, you're meek. And
Yeah.
so we want you lined up with your camera and filling that frame. And that alone is just going to, if you go around the next room, I'm going to challenge your audience. The next room where you show up and there's a lot of people, go around the room and say, who's whose little square
Yeah.
pops at me. I get comments all the time simply from my background and things but I'm always filling the frame. And although I'm going to throw it in there just because I know, Susie, we've talked about it. What are you wearing? Does that pop?
Yeah.
Right? Is it pop against your background or are you kind of like falling into your background?
Yeah.
So again, these are just tiny little things that have nothing to do with what's coming out of your mouth that can help you appear more confident.
What is your pop of color is one of the things that I talk about in my training. And
Yeah.
it's like, think about what makes you different.
Yeah.
How can you stand out? Don't try to look like everyone else, but just even taking an audit of that. I love that idea of
Yeah.
looking at other people and noticing how they're framed, but also look at yourself. What do
Yeah.
you need to adjust? What do you need to do?
Yeah. And I get in social media, I'll get emails and people will take screen grabs because you won't be able to unsee it. That's the one thing about working with me. You're like, it's like a tiny Tracy on your shoulder because people say like, oh my gosh, I was in this webinar and the person giving the webinar, look at their framing, look at how like they're
Oh
not
my
well lit,
gosh.
they're not. And I was like, and they're like, can you help them? I'm like, well, I can help them, but I'm not going to, unsolicited just reach out to them and say, you need help. But again, think about that when now they're looking and they're seeing like, is that person in a position of authority or
Yeah.
not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So important. All right. I want to make sure we get to some gestures. Talk,
Yeah.
talk to us about the nonverbals and some of the research around what does that communicate?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to start with the most obvious one, which I'm going to go there. Smile and nod, right? So if you are not the speaker and you are, part of the group, smile and nod to show that you're paying attention. These are little things that make a huge difference. And again, as speakers, Susie and I will tell you, like, it's really nice to look around a room and see people nodding, smiling, even taking notes would be great, right? But those are little nonverbals. Using your hands. I am an effusive speaker. I like to use my hands quite a bit. You don't want to go what I call Grover style, where it's all over the place and you're flapping your arms back and forth. But when you use your body, um, again, there's with hands alone, it's implied that you have greater intelligence. People who use their head,
Ooh.
they've done studies on this, and then hand gestures make people listen to you. And in the video world, again, we're in this like tiny little box. It's okay to cross that frame. It's okay to use them. If you're saying the number 3, put a 3 up. If you're saying greater, do make a sign like this. It helps people engage. And again, these are tiny little things that you can just start to, I mean, you can see I do like tiny little things that you can do to enhance how you're perceived in the virtual world. Other nonverbals, I mean, we were talking about, so a nonverbal, but something I like to work on is what I call the lilt and the tilt. And that is how your voice goes up and down. So this again isn't content, but it helps you really listen to what someone's saying. And so when I'm working with leaders and sometimes they're a little bit monotone, we will literally go through and I'll say, here's how I would say this. Susie has experienced this. Here's how I would say it. And I will
Yep.
say it, with some lilt and tilt, not ending on a question up. If it's something that you're trying to make a statement about, you want to come down. So these are, again, things that can be worked on quite easily once you're attuned to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but those, I would say those are my favorites.
Yeah. That's so good. And I hate to say this, people will cringe. Record yourself and watch yourself
Oh yeah,
and see if you are an observer of yourself a few times, you will benefit in spades because you can't unsee what
yeah,
you've seen and think about some of the ways that we're showing up in your virtual worlds to make sure that you're seen.
yeah.
So
And I'm not going to
interesting.
cringe. I say record yourself because, and maybe even show it to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Ask someone close to you, like, what, like, how do I come off? It's someone you trust who's
Yeah.
going to tell you the truth too. But yeah, so we are our own worst critics. But
Yeah.
record yourself and say, okay, or look at a recording of
Yeah.
yourself where you were in the room. What were you doing? Were you standing out? Were you like, was
Yeah.
it easy to kind of pick you out as someone paying attention, or were you on your phone doing things?
Yeah. And you don't have to do the recording. You can even just ask people before a meeting, hey, I'm really working on my presence. Can
Yeah,
you watch me and give me some feedback?
so
If
good.
you ask afterwards, they haven't collected the data
No,
that they need to give to you. So tell them before, like, this is an important aspect of building your influence, building trust, building connection, and being seen. So
yes.
taking these tips. So when we come back with Tracy, we're going to get you, I'm going to put you on the spot. Give us 3 tips that the audience can use starting right now to change the way that they're being seen. All right, so now we're going to get 3 tips from Tracy, and I'm excited because I'm going to really think about how I'm going to put these tips into practice. So, what's your first tip?
Well, and I'm going to do this in like, these are the 3 most important things I want you to be thinking about. So if you got
Okay.
nothing else out of these, let's do tip number 1 is work on your framing, work on where you are in your virtual space.
Yep. And I think that's so when I think about that, I've gotten really good at the frame and I can't unsee it. I'm like you. when I see people out of their frame, it just really bothers me. So I'm really good at putting myself in the frame. But what you've taught me is it does make a difference to look at that green dot.
Yeah.
And if I don't do that, I feel like I can tell that the connection isn't there with the other person.
Yes.
And especially when I'm working with people one-on-one, that's so important. So I really focus on that green dot and think about it as that's them feeling like I'm listening to them. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to really focus on that green dot in my frame.
I think you're great. You're doing great at it.
Okay.
And then the tip number 2, I would say, is like, let's pick one nonverbal thing that you can do. And if you're having trouble picking one of those, I would start with, it's a pretty easy entry point, which is being present by smiling and nodding. So listening to the other speakers, regardless of who's speaking, and really engaging. Just trying that one little nonverbal thing, I think will help a lot in how you're being perceived.
Yeah. As a speaker, I've had to tell myself just because I don't think they're listening doesn't mean they're not listening.
No, correct.
So this is such an important one. And I think what I forget sometimes when I'm not the active person speaking is that I'm thinking. And so my face gets into, B face, as they say. So I'm going to really think about like even a soft smile, not like a cheesy smile, but just a soft smile.
Right. And you don't want to go overboard, right? But again, like even when Susie's been speaking, if you watch, I'm listening. I'm actively listening to Susie. And so it's a natural thing to just nod and smile a little bit. My third tip is definitely going to be about, we're talking about leverage, right? Is speak up. Say something. So if you are in a meeting, that is the best way to be heard and seen, is so ask a question. If you don't have a question, then think about something someone said and add a comment to that, because that will, again, it just helps you become memorable. And that's what we want. We want for you to be memorable in this virtual space.
Totally. And I have a friend who says she's always the first one to ask the first question in a big, kind of presentation. And I thought, oh, that's so good to, even if it's uncomfortable for you, what can you do to support somebody else or say something? These are great. So the frame, one nonverbal, and then, what was the last one?
Asking questions or comments. Yeah.
Ask one question or comment all the time. Oh, these were great. Great tips. Let us know which one you use. And when we come back, we'll just tie this all up and get you something to think about that we want you to take away. We'll be right back. Oh, this has been so good, Tracy. I'm so grateful for you. What do you want the people to really think about as we close this out?
Well, I don't want to be a Nike commercial here, but I want you to do it. But I also want you to take your time with this, right? We've gone over a lot of different things. So pick one, pick two, and really start to integrate it, because it is so important when we're talking about leadership and leverage. You need to really step into that role. And these verbal, nonverbal, how you're showing up, how you're being perceived is really, really important. So take your time with this, but do it.
Yeah. These things can create impact and make you seen. Oh, so good. If you were listening and you're like, oh, I wish I could have seen them, this is on my YouTube channel, so you can watch this again. If you know somebody that needs to see this, send it to them. They'll never know that we told you to do that till they got to the end. If you want to know more about me, go to negotiationlove.com. Tracy, how can people connect with you?
I think my favorite way is on LinkedIn. I'm a LinkedIn lady. So again, working with executive and corporate leaders, with coaching, virtual presence, speaking presence, that's my wheelhouse.
That's your jam.
That's my jam.
That's your jam, as you say.
That's my
yes.
Jam.
Oh, this is so good. And like Tracy had said, just do it. Do something to change the way you're showing up so you can be seen. So good, Tracy. Thank you so much for being here, giving us your wisdom. And as you know, I want to make sure that Tracy, that negotiation is more than a skill, right? It's a mindset.